My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 32 years old, and 3 weeks after my father passed away, my whole family thinks my life is a joke. It all started the day we gathered to read the will. The law office was eerily quiet. My brother, Daniel, sat confidently in the chair opposite me, his arm around his wife's shoulder as if he already knew how things would end. My husband, Mark, sat beside me, engrossed in his phone, barely looking up as the lawyer began to read. The room seemed to grow colder with each sentence. The chain of restaurants in the city center will belong to Daniel Mitchell. My brother immediately smiled. His wife squeezed his hand. My aunt whispered her congratulations before the lawyer could finish his sentence. Then the lawyer continued. The former Desert Route gas station and the land will be transferred to Sarah Mitchell. For a moment, no one said anything. Then someone burst out laughing. Not noisy, just a soft chuckle. My brother leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying himself. A gas station, he said. Finally, my husband looked up from his phone. Wait a minute, he said, looking confused. You mean that abandoned place along Highway 68? The lawyer nodded. Yes, that's the property. Daniel couldn't hide his smile any longer. Excellent, he said. Dad really knows who to invest in. A few people at the table burst out laughing. My face was burning, but I tried to remain silent. On the way home, my husband didn't say a word. There aren't any, but that evening, at dinner, he finally looked at me and said something I will never forget. Sarah, do you know what the problem is? I didn't answer. He leaned back in his chair and chuckled softly. Your brother is getting rich, he said, and you will inherit the rubbish. I think that's the worst thing he could have said, but I was wrong, because just a few minutes later, he said words that would change my life forever. If you sit in that chair to hear your own family laugh at what your father left you, what will you do? You will accept that? Or will you try to prove that everyone in that room is wrong? Take some time and please share your honest opinions in the comments. Friend, what would you do if you were in my situation? And if you like stories about unexpected plot twists, family betrayal, and transforming humiliation into strength, don't forget like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the rest of this story. Because of what happened that night, after we got home, that was the moment everything really fell apart. And it all started with a saying of my husband. But that night, when we got home, the silence between us was heavier than anything that had happened across the street. The house is very quiet. It's too quiet. My 2 sons were upstairs in their room, watching cartoons before bed. Their laughter echoed down the hallway, soft and innocent, completely unaware of what had just happened inside our family. I stood in the kitchen, rinsing dishes in the sink, trying to focus on the little things, the sound of running water, the clinking of dishes, anything to distract myself from thinking about what had happened that morning. For almost 20 minutes, Mark didn't say a word. He sat at the dining table, scrolling through his phone, occasionally sighing as if the whole situation had caused him inconvenience. Finally, he hung up the phone. A gas station, he said. I didn't answer. He leaned back in his chair, staring at me as if he were scrutinizing a disappointing business report. Not even a single operational location remains, he added. That place has been closed for many years. I slowly dried my hands with a kitchen paper towel. It's still property, I said softly. For a moment, he just stared at me. Then he laughed. Quiet, not aggressive. That's the kind of laugh people usually have when they hear something that sounds funny. Sarah, he said, shaking his head. Your brother just inherited a chain of restaurants in the city. He leaned forward on the table. And you'll find an abandoned gas station next to a highway in the middle of the desert. His words still echoed in the air. I felt a tightness in my chest, but I remained silent. Because deep down, I had already thought the same thing. However, hearing that said only made me more heartbroken. Mark got up and walked towards the refrigerator. Do you know what the real problem is? He continued. I didn't answer. He opened a bottle of water and took a long sip before continuing. Daniel knows how to build something, he said. His father trusted him with real investments. Then he looked straight at me. And you, he shrugged. You get what's left over. Something inside me feels like it's breaking. I spent 10 years supporting Mark as he built his small construction company, 10 years of managing the house, 10 years of raising our sons. For 10 years, I believed that partnership means standing by each other, even when things aren't perfect. But at the time, I didn't feel it was a collaboration. I feel like I'm being judged. And then he said words that I will never forget. "You're completely useless, Sarah." The kitchen suddenly felt very cramped. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Mark looked toward the stairs where our sons were sleeping. And that's when everything really changed. "Perhaps your father knows something we don't," he said. I looked up. "What do you mean?" He shrugged indifferently. "If that's the kind of property he thinks would be right for you," he pointed towards the door. "Perhaps that's where you should live." My heart stopped beating for a moment. "What? You heard that?" His voice held no trace of anger. "That's the worst part. The weather is calm. It's cold. It seems he's made up his mind. If you inherit that gas station," he said, "then go live there." I stared at him, waiting for him to laugh, soften his tone, and admit that he was just joking. He didn't do that, Mark, I whispered. But he had already turned his back and walked away. "You and your children could stay there for a while," he added. "Perhaps you'll figure out a way to solve this problem." The room felt like it was spinning. I want to debate, I want to scream, but deep down, I didn't want him to achieve that. Instead, I simply turned around and went upstairs. My sons were almost dozing off. I packed a small suitcase full of clothes, a few jackets, a few snacks to bring along on the way. When my eldest son saw the bag, he rubbed his eyes. "Mom." "Yes." "Are we going anywhere?" I forced a smile. "Just for a moment. It takes about 40 minutes to get to the gas station." The highway was pitch black, almost deserted. The streetlights glided past the windshield, one after another like slow-moving shadows. My youngest son fell asleep in the middle of the trip. My eldest son just silently stared out at the street. Neither of them asked any further questions, and that silence broke my heart even more. When we finally arrived, the place looked even worse than I remembered. The old gas station sign flickered weakly above the empty plot of land. Half of the letters were burned to ashes. The building stood quietly beside the highway, as if it had been forgotten for many years. There are no cars. There are no lights. There is no life. I parked the car and turned off the engine. I just sat there for a moment. My hands were on the steering wheel. My whole life fell apart in a single evening, but my sons are sleeping in the back seat, and I can't let myself fall apart. I took a deep breath, opened the car door, and then they stepped out into the chilly night air. At the time, I believed my father had left me the worst possible inheritance. A gas station is broken, a vacant property, a symbol of failure that everyone else had already ridiculed. But what I don't know yet, something none of us know. Did that happen inside that abandoned building? My father left behind something that would change everything. The night air around the gas station was colder than I expected. I stood there for a moment, beside the car, staring at the dark building in front of me. The old neon sign on the roof flickered weakly, humming a tune every few seconds, as if struggling to function. My sons have. I walked around the car and opened the door carefully, trying not to wake them up too suddenly. "Hey," I whispered softly. My eldest son blinked slowly, then looked out the window. "Is that all?" he asked softly. I forced a smile. That's the case for now. They didn't complain. They were too tired. And perhaps, deep down, they trusted me more than I trusted myself at that time. We walked towards the building together. The front door creaked loudly as I pushed it open, the sound echoing throughout the empty room. The smell of dust, old wood, and stuffy air immediately filled the room. It feels as though this place hasn't been properly opened in years. Inside, the office was small and dark. There was an old stall, a few broken chairs, and a table that looked like it had been used for decades. Only one light remained on when I flipped the switch. The weak yellow light illuminated the room just enough for us to see everything. "It's all right," I said gently to the boys. "It's just a little dusty." Behind the office was a small living area that my father must have used when he lived here. The furniture was old, but still usable. I used a few tissues from my bag to wipe the sofa clean. "We'll sleep here tonight," I said. My sons are too tired to argue. Just a few minutes later, both of them fell asleep. I just sat there and watched them for a long time. Their faces were so calm, completely unaware of how precarious our situation had become. Just 12 hours earlier, we were living in a comfortable house. We were sleeping in an abandoned gas station on the side of a desert highway. But strangely enough, I didn't cry. Perhaps I'm just too tired. Or perhaps I've reached a point where I have no more tears left to shed. Around midnight, I returned to the front office. The silence there felt strange. Outside, occasionally a car would speed down the highway, its headlights illuminating the window for a moment before disappearing into the darkness again. I sat down behind the counter. On a chair that must have been my father's in the old days, there were still a few items scattered on the table. Register of former customers. The files were covered in dust. A broken clock hung crookedly on the wall. I started opening the drawers without really knowing what I was looking for. Perhaps I was angry. Perhaps I'm trying to understand why my father abandoned me in a place like this. The first drawer is empty. The second drawer contains old receipts and maintenance records from many years ago. Nothing important, nothing useful. This is just proof that the gas station has gradually become less important. But then something caught my attention. Behind the counter, near the back wall, there is a small wooden cabinet. At first glance, it looks completely normal. But there was something about it that didn't quite fit in with the rest of the room. Everything else in the office was covered in dust. This cabinet, isn't it? It looks newer, cleaner. It's as if someone just opened it. I moved closer. The cupboard door was locked. But right next to it, hanging on a small nail on the wall, was a key. I stopped. My hand hovered in the air for a moment. Why did my father leave the keys right next to the cupboard? If there's nothing important inside, there's no need to lock it. And if there is anything precious, why make searching so easy? As I reached for the keys, my fingers suddenly felt icy cold. The gas station is now completely silent. Even the highway noise has disappeared. I hesitated for a moment. It's not because I'm afraid of what might be inside, but I was afraid I wouldn't find anything at all. If the cupboard is empty, so Mark was right. This place would truly be nothing more than a forgotten piece of land, a joke, a mistake. And perhaps my father simply ran out of things to give me. I took a deep breath, then slowly insert the key into the lock. Metals are easily rotated. Too easy. It's almost as if it was only recently used. The cupboard door opened with a soft click. There was no money inside, no jewelry. There are no amazing secret treasures. It's just paperwork. A few thick envelopes, a rolled-up map, and a small metal box. Initially, I felt extremely disappointed, but then curiosity replaced it. I took out the map first. It was a detailed land survey of the entire gas station site. The boundary is clearly marked with red ink. But what caught my attention was something else. A thin blue line was drawn across the land in the background. It cuts across the land like a trail. At first, I didn't understand what it meant. Then I opened one of the envelopes. There were letters inside. Most of them came from the urban planning department. The others came from companies I had never heard of. But as I continued reading, one thing became very clear. These are not old documents. Those events happened recently. Just recently. A letter dated just 3 months ago. At that time, my father was seriously ill. Why is he still receiving official letters regarding this property? My heart started beating faster. Because suddenly, this abandoned gas station doesn't look as worthless as people might think. And I searched those envelopes even more thoroughly. I increasingly realized that my father might know something that the rest of us didn't. For a few seconds, I just stared at the letters in my hands. The stack of thin envelopes suddenly felt much heavier than before, because the more I look at them, the more I see something that doesn't make sense. These are not old documents from many years ago. Those events happened recently. Just recently. A letter dated just 3 months ago. At that time, my father was in the hospital, too weak to walk on his own. So why does he continue to receive official letters about this gas station? I slowly sat down in the chair behind the counter. The usually quiet office suddenly felt different, less like an abandoned building, and it's more like a place waiting for something. I carefully opened the first letter. Inside was an official announcement from the Urban Planning Department. At first glance, this language may seem complex, full of technical jargon and lengthy passages, but there was one phrase that immediately caught my attention. A highway expansion project has been proposed. My eyes quickly scanned the pages of the book. This document describes the future infrastructure development plan related to the nearby highway. The article mentions new lanes, additional exits, commercial development area. Initially, I didn't fully understand its meaning, but then I remembered the blue line on the topographic survey map. My hands began to tremble slightly as I unfolded the map again. It's there. It's still that same thin blue line. Drive straight through the back of the gas station's property. I leaned closer to the desk lamp, studying the map more carefully. And then that awareness gradually formed in my mind. That blue line isn't there by chance. That is the roadmap for future highway expansion. That means the vacant lot behind the gas station will soon be right next to a major highway exit. Traffic, gas station, restaurant, hotel, the shops. All of these things appear when a new highway exit is built. My heart started beating faster. I quickly opened another envelope. This project comes from a private development company. Inside was a formal letter, an offer. They want to buy that piece of land. It's not just the building, the land. And the number listed in that offer made me hold my breath for a moment. That amount is far more than what that gas station could have earned from selling gasoline. Even if it's been open for 20 years, I sat there in complete silence. Suddenly, the laughter during the reading of the will took on a completely different tone. Jokes, insult. Everyone's eyes were filled with sympathy. None of them knew what this land would become. But my father already knew. I opened another envelope, and then there was another one. Each letter contained similar content, different developers, different companies. They all asked the same question. Is the owner considering selling this property? And each letter ended with the same musical note. The offer was rejected. My father refused them all. This raises another question. Why? Why did he turn down so many offers? At the bottom of the cupboard, I noticed the small metal box again. This door is also locked. But this time, the key was already inside one of the envelopes. It was as if he wanted me to find it. My hands trembled as I inserted the key into the lock. I sat there for a while, staring at the box, because something inside me already knew what I was about to read. The lock is open. There was only one item inside the box, a piece of paper folded, handwritten. I recognized the handwriting immediately. My father's. My chest tightened as I slowly unfolded the paper. The piece of paper trembled slightly in my hand. The first sentence left me breathless. Sarah, if you are reading these lines, then I am no longer here. I had to stop for a moment. The words blurred before my eyes, but I forced myself to keep going. I know what people will think when they hear about the will. Let them think that way. Sometimes the most precious gift is the smallest one. A tear rolled down my cheek. I wiped it clean and continued reading. This gas station is worthless because of its current condition. It is valuable because of what it will become in the future. My heart was pounding. The city has approved the highway expansion plan. When the project begins, that plot of land will become one of the most important commercial locations along the route. My father already knew. He knew that long before anyone else did. You are always patient. The letter continued. You must observe before you act. You should read before you speak. That's why I'm giving this task to you. I covered my mouth with my hand, because suddenly the whole story became clear. My father did not give Daniel the best inheritance. He gave him the most obvious answer, the safest one. That's what everyone was waiting for. But the gas stations are the future. The letter ended with one final sentence. Another meeting request from the developer will be coming soon. When they return, listen carefully before making a decision. I sat there for a long time after I finished writing the letter. The quiet gas station surrounding me no longer felt like a symbol of failure. It felt like something completely different. A secret. A plan. A future no one has ever seen before. He's not my brother. He's not my husband. Even the rest of my family didn't. And suddenly, Mark's words echoed in my mind. Go and live there. He said it as if it were a punishment. It was as if he was throwing me away. But in reality, that single sentence led me straight to where my father had hidden my future. I carefully folded the letter and placed it back inside the metal box. Then I returned the documents to the cabinet and lock it again. It's not because I'm afraid, but I wasn't ready to tell anyone yet. Not yet. Outside, another car sped down the highway. Its headlights briefly illuminated the gas station sign. For the first time that night, I looked at that flashing sign with a different perspective. Because this place is no longer just an abandoned building. It's something much more powerful. But before I could celebrate anything, I need proof that the project actually exists. Because paperwork is a different matter. The reality is quite different. And if the highway expansion hasn't been approved yet, so everything I've just discovered might still just be a dream. I sat on the old chair behind the counter for a long time, staring at my father's letter. The gas station was silent again. Outside, the gentle noise of highway traffic echoed softly. But inside the office, time seemed to slow down. My father's words still echo in my mind. The city will approve the highway expansion. Acceptance. It's not possible. That's impossible. Will? But the more I think about it, the more cautious I become, because correspondence and plans are one and the same thing. The reality is quite different. Projects are frequently canceled. The situation is constantly changing. The budget disappeared. And if that highway project hasn't been approved yet, then this whole finding may still just be a possibility, a hopeful hypothesis. But that's not a realistic future. I slowly reached for my phone. My hands are still shaking a little. I opened my browser and searched for the phone number of the Urban Planning Department. The screen lit up in the dim office light. I hesitated for a moment, because if the woman on the other end of the line told me that the project had been canceled, then everything will collapse again. I took a deep breath, then pressed the call button. The phone rang twice, 3 times. On the 4th ring, someone picked up the phone. City Planning Department. The woman's voice sounded very calm and professional. "Hello?" I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I'm calling to inquire about a property on Highway 68. What address?" I got the gas station address from one of those documents. There was a moment of silence. Then I heard the sound of keyboards being typed. For a few seconds, the only sound in the office was the soft clicking of her keyboard. Finally, she spoke up again. "Yes," she said. "The highway expansion project in that area has been approved." Approved. That was like a shockwave hitting me. My heart immediately started pounding. I asked, "When will construction begin?" "Preparations will begin in about 4 months," she replied. "And that area will be redeveloped for commercial purposes. It pertains to commerce. That means businesses, hotel, restaurant, gas station. All of this happens when the highway exit gets crowded." My father was right. Every word in his letter was true. "Has anyone recently contacted the property owner?" I asked cautiously. "Yes," she said. "Several development groups have sent letters expressing interest. Questions of interest. Developers. Companies. Those who knew beforehand how valuable this land could become." I quickly thanked her and ended the call. I just stood there for a few seconds. In the quiet office, the gas station suddenly took on a completely different appearance. The place no longer feels abandoned. This place gives the feeling that it's the center of some kind of event about to begin. But the next step is still very important. Because if the developers are already interested in that piece of land, at that point, I needed to know exactly how serious the problem was. I took one of the job offer letters out of the cupboard again. The newest one has the phone number printed on the bottom. Horizon Development Group. I stared at that number for a while. Then I dialed the number. The phone only rang once. "I'm Daniel from Horizon Developments," a man replied. His voice sounded very confident. "Professional." "My name is Sarah Mitchell," I said. I called the Sunset Route gas station site. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. Then, his tone immediately changed. "Sarah," he said, "we have been trying to contact the previous owner for months now. My father has passed away," I said softly. Another brief silence. "I'm very sorry to hear that," he replied, "but we are still very interested in that location. Very interested." Those 2 words made my heart pound. "What exactly are you interested in?" I asked. "That's the plot of land behind the house," he said. "It's located right next to the future highway exit, precisely at the location indicated by the blue line on the map." Just as my father predicted, things would change. "Would you be willing to meet?" he asked. I looked around the small office again, at the dusty stall, at the broken chairs. Look at the flashing gas station sign outside the window. "Friday," I said. "Friday is fine." "Excellent," he replied. "We will send our team to inspect the property." When the call ended, I slowly sat down, because suddenly everything felt so real. Humiliation at the dinner table, my husband's laughter, my brother's smug smile. They are all built upon a simple assumption: that gas station is worthless. But the truth is quite different. This property is not in any state of disrepair. It is waiting. The next day passed peacefully. My sons explore the empty parking lot as if it were an adventure. They cycled between the old gas pumps and laughed as if nothing had changed. Children adapt more quickly than adults. But Thursday night, something unexpected happened. My phone rang. Looking at the screen, my chest tightened. That's Mark, my husband. I haven't spoken to him since the night he told me to leave. For a moment, I considered ignoring the call. But in the end, I answered. "Hello?" His voice sounded calmer than before, almost normal. "So," he said, "have you come to your senses yet?" I didn't reply immediately. "Sarah," he continued, "you can't live at that gas station forever." I looked out the office window and saw my sons playing outside. "I won't need to do that," I said softly. He sighed. "You know, Daniel is finalizing a big investment deal this week." His tone was still as condescending as I remembered from previous dinners. "You should see what true success looks like." For a moment, I almost burst out laughing, because in less than 24 hours, the definition of success might be very different. "Perhaps I will," I replied calmly. And when the call ended, I felt something change inside me. For the first time since my father passed away, I am no longer someone people pity, because tomorrow morning, when those developers arrive, this dilapidated gas station might just show its true value. And when that happens, things will change. Friday morning arrived faster than I expected. In fact, I tossed and turned all night. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, those thoughts came back. What if the developers changed their minds? What if the highway project was delayed? What if those letters in the cabinet were just old, unfinished negotiations? However, despite those doubts, when the first rays of sunlight shone through the dusty windows of the gas station office, something inside me felt different. Calm down, because this is the first time since my father passed away that I've received information that no one else in my family knows. And that changed everything. Outside, the highway was bustling. Cars and trucks streamed by in long lines of morning traffic. I stood near the edge of the parking lot, watching them, imagining what this place would look like a year from now. Then, just before 10 o'clock, I saw it. A black SUV slowed down on the highway and turned into the gas station entrance. My heart immediately started beating faster. Another car followed behind. 3 men walked out. One of them approached me with a confident yet respectful expression. I recognized his voice even before he spoke. "Sarah Mitchell?" he asked. "Correct." He held out his hand. "I'm Daniel from Horizon Developments. Thank you for meeting us." His tone was calm and professional, a complete contrast to the mocking remarks I had heard at the reading of the will. And almost immediately, I noticed something else. None of them looked towards the building. They are observing the land. Careful, slow. It's like everyone is inspecting something incredibly valuable. First, they walked around the entire property. They measured distances with small electronic devices. They took pictures. They studied the vacant lot behind the gas station, the one marked in blue on my father's map. Occasionally, they would ask a few questions. "Do you own the entire plot of land behind the building?" "Correct." "Is there an agreement regarding land use rights with the adjacent land?" "Are not." "Are there any outstanding lease payments?" "Are not." Each answer seemed to pique their interest even more. Finally, after nearly an hour of walking around the property, we returned to the small office. Daniel sat down opposite me at the old table. He took some time to review the documents I had laid out. Then he folded his arms. "Sarah," he said calmly, "once the highway exit is completed, this location will become incredibly important for commercial development." I nodded slowly. "I have read the urban planning documents." A slight smile appeared on his face. "Then you'll understand the opportunity." Opportunity. That sounds completely different from how my husband described this place. For Mark, this property was just a joke. For these men, it was an investment. Daniel opened his briefcase and took out a file. "We are ready to make an offer today," he said. He pushed the file across the table. My finger rested gently on it for a moment before I opened it, because I knew that whatever numbers were on those pieces of paper would determine the future of my life and the future of my children. I slowly opened the document. For a moment, I thought I had misread the number, so I looked again, and then again. My chest tightened as the truth gradually emerged. The offer is very attractive. That amount was more than all the money my husband ever earned from his construction business. That's more than the entire year's revenue of my brother's restaurant chain. And Daniel spoke up before I could reply. "This is our initial proposal," he said calmly. "Initial. That means it could increase." For a moment, the room was completely silent. The flickering lamp above the table trembled slightly. Outside, another truck sped past on the highway. My father already knew, months ago. While everyone else thought that gas station was worthless, he saw its future. But even after realizing that, I still tried to remain calm. "I need some time to consider everything," I said cautiously. Daniel nodded immediately. "Of course." He stood up and extended his hand again. "We will give you 48 hours. 48 hours. 2 days to decide something that could change the entire course of my life." After the developers left, the gas station became quiet again. But this silence was completely different from the night before. Yesterday, this place seemed abandoned. Today, this place feels like the center of an event about to begin. I stepped outside again and looked towards the vacant lot behind the building. Before long, that plot of land will be next to a highway exit. Before long, thousands of cars will be passing through here every day. Before long, businesses will appear. Restaurant, hotel, shop. Everything turned out exactly as my father had predicted. At that moment, my phone vibrated in my pocket. When I looked down, my chest tightened. That was a message from the family group chat. My sister, Olivia, sent a picture. She was sitting in a restaurant with some investors. My husband was sitting next to her. They both smiled. The caption under the photo reads as follows: "Celebrating tangible assets." I stared at the screen for a moment. They still believe exactly what they believed when they read the will. Daniel inherited the future, and I inherited that failure. But now I know the truth. I typed the answer without thinking much. Just one sentence. "Let's have dinner together on Sunday night." My sister replied almost immediately. Sure. Her confidence was evident even in her text messages, because she still believed the story was already decided. But when I looked back at the gas station behind me, I realized something important. Reading the will is not the end of the story. This is just the beginning. And on Sunday evening, when I placed that job offer letter on the table, eventually, my family will understand what my father truly left for me. It's not a broken gas station. It is not a forgotten piece of land. But that is the most valuable asset. Future. The next 2 days seemed unusually long. Although the developers made an offer, I wasn't in a hurry to make any decision. Instead, I spent those hours reflecting on everything that had happened over the past week. First, there was my father's funeral. Next is the reading of the will, laughter, insult. And finally, the night my husband told me I had to leave. At that time, I felt it was the worst period of my life. But now, sitting in the small office of the gas station, those memories carry a different feeling. For the first time, I understood something important. My father didn't leave me even a small inheritance. He assigned me a task that required patience, and patience has always been my strength. Meanwhile, life at the gas station gradually became more peaceful. During the day, my sons treat the empty parking lot like a giant playground. They ride their bikes between the rusty gas pumps, laughing as if nothing in the world has changed. At first, seeing them made me feel guilty, but gradually, a different feeling replaced that feeling of guilt. You. Every time I look out at the vast expanse of land behind the station, I picture what the developers have described: highway exit, traffic, businesses, opportunity. And with each passing hour, the humiliation of reading the will seemed to lessen. Finally, Sunday evening arrived. The dinner invitation I sent earlier this week was accepted immediately. And, as I predicted, my sister chose the same restaurant where she had celebrated her investment just days earlier. When I walked into the restaurant, I saw they were already seated at the table. Olivia looked very confident, elegantly dressed in a dark dress. Her husband sat beside her, relaxed and smiling. And Mark, my husband, sat opposite them. For a moment, no one said anything. Then Olivia broke the silence. "So," she said with a slight smile, "how's life at the gas station?" Her voice sounded very friendly, but beneath that friendly exterior, I could still hear a hidden amusement. "It's very peaceful here," I replied calmly. Mark leaned back in his chair and watched me. "Have you finally realized that this situation can't go on?" he asked. I didn't reply immediately. Instead, I simply picked up the menu because there's no longer any reason to argue. The truth will soon be revealed. Dinner begins with small talk. Olivia spent most of her time discussing her latest investment plans. She talked about expanding her apartment portfolio and negotiating new deals with investors. Every time she mentioned numbers or profits, Mark would nod in agreement. I silently observed them for a moment. Those who once mocked my inheritance are still completely convinced they have won. Finally, Olivia leaned forward. "So," she asked, "what are your plans for the gas station?" I placed the napkin on the table. Then I slowly reached into my pocket. "My plan," I repeated softly. "Yes," she said. I took out a thin, lightweight file and gently placed it on the table. "This." She seemed confused for a moment. Then she opened the folder. Initially, her expression remained unchanged. But when she read the number on the job offer, her smile disappeared. Completely. The whole table suddenly fell silent. Her husband leaned closer to look at the documents. Then, Mark snatched the paper from her hand. For a few seconds, he just stared at it. Once, but then it happened again. This can't possibly be true," he whispered. "Yes," I replied. And that was just the first offer. The silence that followed seemed heavy. Olivia slowly leaned back in her chair. "That number," she whispered, "is larger than the entire portfolio of real estate I own." "Yes," I replied calmly. Mark was still staring at the piece of paper, but when he finally looked at me, his expression was completely different from before. The arrogance has disappeared. The mockery has disappeared. Now only doubt remains. "You already know about this?" he asked. "My father already knows," I replied. He left the property to me because he understood that it would become the price it had to pay. Just then, the waiter approached the table. "Is everything all right here?" he asked politely. I closed the file and smiled. "Yes," I said. "Finally, everything is all right?" After that, nobody said anything more. Because suddenly, the balance of power at the table shifted. The very inheritance they had mocked just days before had now become the family's most prized possession. Finally, dinner came to an end. Outside the restaurant, the night air was cool and quiet. Mark followed me toward the parking lot. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he cleared his throat. "Sarah, maybe we should talk." I stopped walking, because now I understand one thing clearly. The man told me to leave the house. The man who once called me useless, he no longer speaks confidently. He said those words out of regret. But by then, I had heard everything I needed to hear the night he closed the door behind me, and the future awaits me. It's far more significant than the life I've left behind. After that dinner, my heart finally calmed down. It's not excitement. This is not revenge. Just clarity is needed. For days on end, my family looked at me as if I had lost everything. Their laughter echoed through the room while they read my will. That night, my husband called me useless, and as I packed my son's clothes and left the house, it seemed everyone was convinced my life was falling apart. But now the story has changed, and more importantly, they all know it. As I drove back to the gas station that night, the road felt completely different. The highway lights still flashed across the windshield, The desolate desert still surrounded the road, but the heavy feeling that had clung to me for the past few days had vanished. Instead, there was a quieter atmosphere. Confidence. When I arrived, the gas station sign flickered softly above the dimly lit parking lot, just like the night we first arrived. My sons were fast asleep in the small study we usually used. I stood outside the building for a moment and looked out at the large open space behind it. 2 days earlier, I had stood in this very spot and felt abandoned. Now, I stand here, knowing that this place holds the future my father had quietly nurtured. The next morning, I called Horizon Developments. Daniel replied almost immediately. "Good morning, Sarah," he said. His tone sounded hopeful but still professional. "I've already reviewed the proposal," I said calmly. "And I'm interested," I replied. There was a brief silence on the phone. "Excellent," he said. But before he could say anything more, I added one more thing. "I'm not selling the entire property." This time, the silence on the other end of the line lasted a little longer. "Keep going," Daniel said. "I want to retain a stake in this development project," I explained. "A share of ownership, because over the past 2 days, I have been thinking very carefully about what my father said. The value of this property doesn't just come from a fleeting moment. It is valuable because of the future it will create. And if my father has entrusted that future to me, then I will not easily abandon it." Finally, Daniel has spoken up again. "That's actually a very clever approach," he said. "We can build a joint development agreement. For the next hour, we discuss the possibilities. Commercial space, restaurant, gas station, retail buildings, even a small hotel." When the call ended, I noticed something noteworthy. That abandoned gas station has gradually been transformed into a real project. A realistic plan, real negotiations, real money. But the biggest change came 2 months later. That was the day I signed the final agreement. The real estate development company has purchased a portion of the land and begun preparing construction plans. At the same time, my investment in the project guarantees a long-term income stream that far exceeds the profitability of the gas station itself. More importantly, it secured a future for my children. And that reassurance gave me the strength to make a different decision. That same week, I filed for divorce. When Mark received the documents, he called me immediately. For the first time in weeks, his voice sounded uncertain. "Sarah, maybe we should talk about this frankly," he said. But I still remember that night in the kitchen. That night, he told me to leave. The night he called me useless. And I also remembered something else. He didn't apologize, thinking I had nothing to lose. He only wants to talk after he sees the job offer. "I think we've said everything we needed to say," I replied softly. He didn't call back after that. My sister's reaction was more complicated. Initially, she tried to appear supportive. She called several times, congratulating me on the deal and saying she was happy about my success. But her tone had changed, because now, when she talks about that piece of land, she no longer calls it a gas station. She called it the project. And deep down, she knew the truth. The inheritance that everyone once ridiculed turned out to be the most valuable thing of all. Time flies so fast. Construction teams have begun preparing the site behind the old train station. Heavy machinery has arrived. The survey teams placed markers on the ground. The flashing gas station sign was eventually removed and replaced with a large banner advertising the future shopping mall project. Occasionally, I drive past the construction site early in the morning. Before the workers arrive, I often park near the edge of the road and watch the sunrise spread across the open field. And every time I stand there, I think about my father, regarding the letter he left inside that small metal box, regarding the quiet confidence he must have possessed when writing those words, because he knows something that the rest of the family doesn't know. He knew that strength wasn't always readily apparent. Sometimes, the greatest opportunities lie in the smallest inheritances. Today, when cars drive past a construction site, most drivers probably don't recognize what the place used to look like. They didn't know that place used to be an abandoned gas station that everyone used to mock. But I know. And every time I see those steel frames rising from the ground, I'm reminded of something important. That night, my husband told me to come and live at that gas station. He thinks he's abandoning me. What he didn't realize was that he was leading me to the very place where my future awaited me. Over the following months, life gradually began to change. At first, everything seemed unreal. For a long time, the gas station has been a symbol of humiliation in my mind. It's where my husband sent me when he wanted me to disappear. It's the legacy that everyone at the reading of the will silently mocked. But now, every time I drive past the land behind that train station, the view looks completely different. The construction equipment has arrived. Large machines moved slowly across the ground, leveling the area and preparing the way for the new highway exit. Survey flags mark the locations of planned future roads and building foundations. The desolate desert that once surrounded the train station is gradually transforming into something far more magnificent. And with each change, I sensed my father's silent plan unfolding exactly as he had predicted. Simultaneously, initially, Olivia tried to pretend that nothing had happened. She went on to talk about her apartment investments, new business meetings, and the success of her rental properties. But every conversation between us now carries an invisible tension, because no matter how confidently she spoke about her work, she knew that something had changed. The inherited property, once taken for granted, has now become the most valuable asset of the entire family. However, Olivia wasn't the one who had the hardest time with that reality. That person is Mark, my soon-to-be divorced husband. Initially, he tried to act as if our breakup had nothing to do with the gas station sale. When we talked about divorce proceedings, he was brief and practical. But occasionally, he would pause briefly before hanging up the phone. It was as if there were things he wanted to say but couldn't find the right words. One afternoon, about a month after construction began, he finally asked the question that had clearly been bothering him. "Do you know?" he asked softly. I understand exactly what he meant. "No," I answered honestly. "My father knows. I only trust him." There was a long silence on the phone, and then Mark said something I didn't expect. I should have trusted him too. I was silent for a moment, because that statement carries weight far beyond the scope of the gas station or that piece of land. It touched upon a deeper truth about our marriage. For many years, I have supported his work, ambitions, and business ventures. But when things became uncertain, he chose to believe the worst about me. Finally, the silence broke, and we both returned to the practical details of the divorce. It wasn't because of anger, but with the quiet understanding that some relationships simply cannot survive when trust disappears. Meanwhile, my sons' lives began to settle down again. We moved to a small house not far from the construction site. It wasn't luxurious, but it offered a sense of peace, and most importantly, this place feels like we chose it together. Occasionally in the evenings, we would drive past the construction site and observe the progress of the work. The steel frames slowly rose from the ground. New roads have connected the highway exit to the development area, and the project banner displays the name of the future shopping mall. Every time I see it, I'm reminded of the night I opened that cabinet in the gas station office. The envelopes were covered in dust. The blue line on the map, this is the letter my father wrote. I was astonished to realize I had almost never discovered any of it. If I ignore that cabinet, if I become too exhausted to continue searching, if I simply accept that the gas station is worthless, things could have been different. But my father realized one important thing. True value is often hidden beneath appearances, and sometimes the greatest opportunities emerge from the smallest disappointments. About 6 months after the development project began, the old gas station building was finally demolished. At that moment, witnessing the demolition evoked a strange emotional response in me. That building was once a place where I felt abandoned, the place where my entire life seemed to fall apart overnight. But it was also there that I discovered the future my father had prepared for me. And in a way, that makes it more meaningful than any house I've ever lived in before. Once the final sections of the old structure were cleared away, the site looked completely open, ready for something new, ready for the next chapter. That evening, as I drove home with my sons in the back seat, the highway lights stretched across the road, just like the first night we arrived at the train station. But my feelings are completely different now. Back then, I believed I had lost everything. Now I understand something much more profound. The moment my husband told me to leave the house, the moment my family burst into laughter while reading the will, that's not the end of my story. They were the originators, because sometimes those moments when you feel rejected are actually something completely different. Sometimes they are simply the path that leads you directly to the future you were meant to build. By the time the first buildings of the residential area began to rise, almost a year had passed since the night I went to the gas station with my sons. Sometimes it still feels wrong. Back then, when I first parked in front of that flashing sign, I truly believed my life was over. My husband told me to leave. My family secretly laughed. I remember sitting in that dusty office and thinking that my father had left me nothing but a forgotten piece of land. But time has a strange way of revealing the truth. As time passed, the empty plot of land behind the gas station gradually transformed into something none of us could have imagined. Every morning before sunrise, construction trucks arrive. The steel structures grow taller week by week. New roads connect the highway exit to the construction site. What was once a quiet desert region is now becoming a bustling center of activity. And every time I drive past that place, I feel a quiet sense of gratitude, not just because of the money the project has generated, but the lesson hidden within that entire experience is what truly matters. Because when I look back on that night when everything changed, I realize one important thing. My life didn't fall apart because of what happened at the gas station. Everything fell apart because the people around me believed that my worth depended on what I inherited. My husband believes that, my sister believes that, even some members of my extended family believe it, but my father would never do that. That's why he handed the gas station over to me, not because it's the smallest asset, but that's because it requires qualities that he knows I possess. Patience. Over time, the development agreement continued to increase in value. New businesses signed leases for future space along the highway exit. Restaurants made reservations. A major fuel company purchased a portion of the frontage. Each new contract increases the long-term value of the project, and with each step forward, my son's future becomes more secure. However, the biggest change in my life wasn't financial. That's a personal matter. For the first time in years, I felt completely independent. The divorce from Mark had been finalized months earlier. The process had been quite smooth, almost quiet. In the end, there was virtually nothing left to argue about, because deep down, we both understand one thing. The marriage had ended long before the legal proceedings began. It all ended the night he decided he believed I was worthless. He still occasionally sends short messages asking about his sons, and sometimes, when we meet at family events, there's an awkward politeness between us, but the resentment that had once permeated those conversations had vanished. Instead, it's distance. Meanwhile, my relationship with Olivia also changed. Trivial, but in a subtle way. She stopped joking about gas stations. She no longer mentions the inheritance as if it were a mistake. Although she never publicly admitted it, I could sense a change in her attitude. The older sister, whom she once believed would receive the weakest inheritance, had built something far more solid than anyone could have imagined. However, I never tried to compete with her, because the truth is, this story was never intended to prove anyone wrong. It's a journey of discovering something within yourself: power, trust, and the ability to keep moving forward even when everything seems to be falling apart. One afternoon, nearly a year after the project began, I drove past that plot of land again. The transformation is truly amazing. The shopping center is half complete. Brightly colored signs mark the locations of future restaurants. Workers are installing the final sections of the access ramps off the highway. Vehicles constantly pass by, thousands of them. Just as my father predicted, I parked the car for a moment and then got out. A gentle breeze swept across the open field, and as I stood there watching the workers finish another section of the road, I suddenly thought of the letter my father had left in that small metal box. You observe before you act. You must read before you speak. That's why this belongs to you. At the time, I didn't fully understand the meaning of those words. But now I've done it, because the strength he saw in me had nothing to do with money or possessions. It all comes down to patience, the ability to wait, to learn more, believe that not everything valuable will be revealed immediately, As the sun began to set behind the highway, I walked back to my car. My sons are waiting at home. Dinner needs to be prepared. The homework needs to be checked. Life goes on with its usual small responsibilities. But now, every time I drive past that highway exit, I'm reminded of something important. That night, my husband told me to come live at the gas station. He believed he was leading me to the worst place of my life. What he didn't realize was that he had inadvertently led me to where my future had always awaited me. And sometimes, the path that seems to be rejected is actually the path that leads you to where you belong. By the second year of construction, the place that used to be, the old, flickering sign, which struggled to stay lit at night, is gone. In its place is a modern entrance sign to the new shopping mall. Bright lights illuminate the highway exit, and each evening, the parking lots gradually fill with people. What used to be restaurants have reopened, a utility, and the new gas station was built almost exactly where that was. Sometimes when I drive through this area, I can hardly believe this is the same place I've been to before. That night, back then, gas. Now everything looks like it's just beginning. However, the most significant changes did not take place on land. Those things happened inside me for a long time. Initially, those words were simply meant to offer comfort. Then they became meaningful. But over time, they have revealed something deeper. My father wasn't just planning for the future of that piece of land. He also believed in something about me. He knew that I would be watching more closely. I tend to question everything. I won't easily give up when faced with difficulties or something disappointing. And that belief changed the way I saw myself. Before all of this happened, I spent years believing that my value came from the roles I played for others. I used to be a wife, a mother, a supportive partner, a person who always helps others succeed. There's nothing wrong with those roles. But when my husband called me useless that night, I realized something heartbreaking. I allowed my self-worth to depend on other people's opinions. And when that perspective changed, everything I believed about myself crumbled. But the journey that followed forced me to rebuild something more solid. Confidence comes from within. It doesn't require the approval of others. That realization gradually influenced every aspect of my life. My sons noticed it too. In the past, they often saw me worrying about little things, financial worries, family expectations, the pressure to please everyone. Now, our house has a completely different feel to it. Calmed down, more balanced. Occasionally in the evenings, we would drive past the construction site together. The boys enjoyed watching the progress. They loved seeing the trucks and cranes moving across the land. One evening, my eldest son asked a question that made me think. "Mom," he said, looking out the window at the new buildings, "does Grandpa know this is going to happen?" I thought for a moment. "Yes," I finally said. "He knows. But how?" my youngest son asked. He noticed. I explained. He looks to the future, not just the present. They were silent for a moment. Then my eldest son smiled softly. "So he knew you'd find out." That statement lingered in my mind long after the conversation ended. Because, in a way, that's exactly what my father believed in. He believed that when the time came, I would seek the truth instead of accepting what others considered right. Meanwhile, the relationship between me and my sister gradually found a new balance. We are still a family, but the underlying rivalry that once existed between us has faded. Perhaps it's because the result surprised everyone. Or perhaps it's because we both understood that our father's decision was never about choosing one child over another. It's about balancing responsibility with personality. Olivia is always confident, bold, and quick acting. I've always been quieter, less judgmental, and more patient. Both strengths are valuable, but in this particular case, patience is key. Over time, the shopping center continued to grow. Many new businesses joined the project, and the highway exit became one of the busiest stops along that route. Drivers passing through the area had no idea that there used to be an abandoned gas station there. But I remembered now every single detail. The office is dusty. The sign is flashing. The cabinet behind the counter is quiet. And that's the moment everything started to change. Because that moment taught me something that no amount of money can replace. Sometimes what might initially seem like a rejection is actually a diversion. The night my husband told me to leave was the worst moment of my life. But if that moment had never happened, perhaps I would never have discovered what my father had prepared for me. And perhaps most importantly, perhaps I will never discover the hidden power within myself. Strength has nothing to do with genetics. It has nothing to do with real estate. It has nothing to do with money. Only with the willpower to keep moving forward when life unexpectedly takes a different turn. Looking back now, I understand one thing clearly. My father left me more than just land. He left me a test, and the greatest gift was hidden inside that test. It was an opportunity for me to discover my true self. Over time, development near the highway exit has progressed quite slowly. What was once a desolate wasteland has now become a small but bustling commercial center. Travelers stop here to refuel, grab a quick bite, or rest before continuing their long journey across the desert highway. Most of them have never wondered what used to exist there. For them, it was simply another convenience store. But every time I pass by that place, I remember it. An abandoned gas station. A quiet building that everyone considered worthless. This is the place where I used to sit alone in the middle of the night, certain that my life was falling apart. But strangely, those memories, instead, they law of proximity. Because when I look back on everything that has happened, I begin to understand that the story never ends. The story is about, at the will reading, everyone viewed the inheritance issue in the simplest way possible. My brother has owned several successful restaurants in the city. I found an old gas station located next to a quiet highway. For them, that comparison seemed quite obvious. Success or failure. But my father never saw things that way. He was looking beyond the present moment. He studied the changes that were about to take place in the region. And more importantly, he gained some understanding of his family members. Some people react very quickly. Others observed closely. Both methods can be effective, but some opportunities require patience before they reveal their true value. That's the lesson hidden within his decision. And over time, that lesson began to shape how I approached the rest of my life. Before all this happened, I had spent years trying to maintain harmony in my family. I avoid conflict. I silently accepted the criticism. I used to believe that supporting others meant remaining silent when others belittled me. But my experience at the gas station forced me to change that perspective. It wasn't because of anger. It's not about revenge, but that's thanks to self-confidence. The confidence that I no longer need the approval of others to understand my own worth. That awareness has influenced even the smallest moments in daily life. When my sons asked about our past, I answered them honestly. When new business opportunities arose within the development project, I conducted thorough research before making a decision. And when people occasionally ask me how I turned a gas station into a successful business, I always give them the same answer. I haven't been able to turn anything into success. My father simply saw the future earlier than any of us. I only know how to listen to the opportunities he missed. Meanwhile, my relationship with my sister gradually became more harmonious. The tension that once existed between us has gradually faded over time. Part of that change came from understanding one important thing. Neither of us was wrong. Simply put, we were shown different paths. Olivia continued to expand her real estate investments in the city. Her confidence and ability to make quick decisions were a perfect fit for that environment. My path is different, slower. Let's analyze it in more detail. And in this particular case, that difference made all the difference. Eventually, even the story within our family began to change. The story of the inheritance, which once elicited quiet laughter, is now a topic of conversation recounted with surprise, sometimes at family gatherings. Someone will mention the gas station and shake their head in disbelief. How did your father know that? They would ask. I usually smile when I hear that question, because the truth is very simple. He doesn't rely on luck. He relies on his observational skills. He pays attention to the small details that others often overlook. City planning, future development models, economic fluctuations. While others judged value based on appearances, he studied what would happen next. And perhaps most importantly, he understood his children. He knows what kind of responsibility each of us is capable of handling. That understanding made his decision far more mature than people realized at the time. One evening, many years after the complex had fully opened. I stopped my car near the highway exit just as the sun was setting. The lights in the shopping mall switched on one by one. Vehicles moved steadily through that area. People were constantly going in and out of the restaurants. That place was so vibrant. I got out of the car and stood near the edge of the parking area. For a moment, I tried to imagine what my father would think if he could see this scene right now. And strangely enough, I'm certain he won't be focusing on the buildings, or it could be the traffic situation, or even the success of the project. Perhaps he would be interested in much simpler things. The plan was a success. This proves that this opportunity was not wasted, and the daughter he trusted with that responsibility found the strength to accomplish it. Standing there in the tranquil afternoon light, I realized something that it took me many years to truly understand. The inheritance my father left me was not simply land. That is belief. I believe I can see things more deeply when others rush to judgment. I believe I will continue searching even when the situation seems hopeless. And the belief that one day I will understand the difference between what something looks like today and what it could become in the future. Looking back now, I realize one important thing about everything that happened. The story doesn't actually revolve around a gas station. And in reality, it was never all about money. The problem lies in how easily people judge value based on appearances. At the reading of the will, everyone believed they understood the situation. My sister inherited the grand buildings in the city, and I inherited an old gas station next to a quiet highway. To them, the conclusion seemed obvious. One of the inherited assets looks very powerful. The other one looks worthless. But life always finds a way to reveal the truth slowly. Sometimes, the opportunity that seems smallest at first glance is the one that will change everything. And sometimes, those who laugh at your situation are simply looking at the wrong moment in your story. Because success doesn't always come immediately. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it silently develops beneath the surface while everyone else is completely unaware. My father understood that. He didn't give me the most obvious assets. He assigned me a task that required patience, attention, and trust. And that might be the most important lesson in this whole story. Your value is not determined by what others see of you at the present moment. That is determined by how you react when life throws you into unfair, unexpected, or even humiliating situations. There will always be times when others underestimate you. Those moments when others think you've lost, those moments when the road ahead of you seems smaller compared to someone else's road, but those moments don't determine the end of your story. Sometimes, they are simply the beginning of the most important part. Because the night my husband told me to go live at that gas station, he believed he was leading me to failure. What he didn't realize was that he was pushing me directly toward my future. And that's something worth remembering. Sometimes rejection isn't the end. Sometimes it's about changing direction. So, if you've ever experienced moments where others doubted you, ridiculed your circumstances, or thought you had failed, remember this. Your story isn't over just because someone decides to stop believing in you. The future often belongs to those who keep moving forward, while everyone else is still judging the present. And now, I would really like to hear your opinions. If you were in my position, sitting at that table while the will was being read, what would you think if you inherited a gas station? So what will you do next? Please share your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy stories about unexpected twists in life, family troubles, and finding strength in difficult times, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more similar stories. Because sometimes the best stories begin precisely where people believe they end.